So we can send it to Marco. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we're recording right now. I'm going to screen share and then let you talk. There we are.
So Mike is here. I'd like to introduce Dottore Loaglio. She's already a doctorate, but this will be her second doctorate at UCSB. So thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So let me get to my slides and see if I can even go in full screen. I don't know if it's possible with the... Okay, so my name is Enrica, and today I'm going to present my dissertation. Misha, is that okay? Are we good? I heard someone talking, so I'm curious if there are problems. Let me know if you don't see things or there are any problems. So today I'm going to be presenting my dissertation that the title is Cognitive and Affective Exploration Through Immersive Story Worlds, Designing Social Virtual Reality for Inclusive Attitude and Behaviors. The goal of actually, before I talk about the dissertation, I have a little bit of an introduction about myself. This is my career, my professional work from the early days of 1996. I graduated as an architect in Italy, and then basically the equivalent of a master's. And then I eventually joined MIT in 1999, 2000. I forget when I started. I was an architect in San Francisco in between. Once I graduated, I became a professor in Cal Poly. I teach in art and design with an honorary appointment in computer science because I run a mixed program. So I teach classes in both departments. In the years of my PhD, since 2018, I've done quite a bit of publications. Some in Europe, like one is in the MD journal that is the A-rank journal in Italy, one in a British journal that is part of Intellect Book. I obviously have a few in the United States, from the traditional, more engineering-oriented papers to the more creative one with the video game art and things like that. I presented at several conferences. I taught full-time in Cal Poly, that is 7 or 8 classes a year, so it's a lot, and managed to get my PhD in Italy as well. So I was busy and loving it, truly loving it. This is Bordighera, my hometown, that is in Italy. So I was surrounded by a lot of beauty, but I was also surrounded by is a divided country, and it was even more at the time. So I think my passion for social justice and my dissertation was born there when I was growing up and seeing a lot of differences and inability to blend or to accept each other. I got my laurea in Lyon, actually, and I did an unconventional project. It was a bridge, kind of Calatrava style, before Calatrava was famous. And it was also an urban design project in this gorgeous city. Is a tongue of land in between two beautiful rivers. And this is divided by a train station, and the bridge was going above the train station. In the early days of 3D modelings, I learned how to 3D models. This was 1996. Remember, Maya was born in 1998, I believe. And this was in fact done with AutoCAD, believe it or not. And I'm still proud of these images because, wow, 1996 is pretty amazing doing stuff like that. And then I got my glorious time in UCSB. I was next to George LaGrady. He inspired me. I also was lucky to work in psychology with Jack Loomis and Andy Beal, where they really got me to love VR and start tinkering with it. So my thesis was a VR space and in the shape of a city that you could navigate, even though it was very primitive, right? It was mostly, the graphics were pretty basics. And these are architectural works I do in my spare time. And this is my little baby program in Cal Poly, is a baby MAT in Cal Poly, in which computer scientists and artists work together. This is the structure of my dissertation that will be kind of matched by the structure of my presentation. I'll introduce in chapter 1 the reasons, and then talk about the context and what is important in the research, and then finally dive into the literature review and the methods, and finally the results. The reasons, the problems that we have, and at times I will read from these slides because I feel like it's kind of well said. And so I'm going to right now actually read it, and sometimes I will just explain it. Literature provides extensive perspective on VR's technological and psychological effects. However, it does not explore VR's design strategies, especially those fostering bias awareness and prejudice reduction. This research aims at filling this gap. The assumptions that VR worlds must be photorealistic, a photorealistic match of the physical world has prevented artists and designers from being included and invited to go collaborate with psychologists and computer scientists in designing VR environment and experiences. And considering the limited outcomes of the traditional bias training, now many companies are looking into going into VR to do bias training, but there's no standards or even research done on how to design it. So these are the big reasons why I feel it's important to tackle this research. And it's fairly new in the sense that indeed there isn't a whole lot in terms of the design aspects of VR worlds that are aimed for prejudice reductions. The main goal, considering that imagine contact with the life experience of other groups make inclusive attitudes more likely, this research primary goal is to define best practices for imagined intergroup contact inside VR as a strategy to combat discriminatory attitude at the individual level. The short-term objective that you will see today in this presentation is to obviously do a review, a literature review of the fields involved in a very transdisciplinary, approach, and then to define the best design practices through the examination of case studies and the state of the art of VR for prejudice reduction. And then obviously the present investigation long-term goal is hopefully to contribute to those VR bias training that might soon arrive in institutions. By the way, this is a magazine of March 2019 that talks about the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion being in VR. These are the fields that are involved in my dissertation and my research. And again, very transdisciplinary, going from design to psychology to virtual reality and to the blend of all these. I do need to say that the understanding of the formation of discriminatory bias and stereotypes and how they are stored in our memory and which mechanisms are available to lessen them are essential, because this research aims to guide how to design characters, world, and stories that are conducive to triggering buyer awareness, compassion, and prosocial behavior. I want to say that, but I also want to say that I'm not a psychologist, right? So the disclosures are about how I have a keen interest in the field, and I managed to get the classes with the best researchers in the world in the field, right? From like multimedia learning with Richard Meyer to Diane Mackey for intergroup contact to Michael Gazzaniga, the best of the, I believe, in the world. I was lucky to take their classes, but I'm far from a psychologist. I don't have their rigor. I don't have their breadth. So I'm just trying to do my best to navigate a cross-disciplinary world. And I am half a computer scientist because I do sure enjoy coding. I do love it as long as it's within a visual, interface. So I can do Python and Maya. I can obviously play with Unity coding and blueprints and Unreal, but that's kind of where I stop. And definitely I'm a designer all the way. I enjoy it greatly. The questions: how can we design and craft virtual reality experiences that are conducive to conveying group belonging, compassion, and empathy towards specific social identity and may bring awareness of one's prejudicial attitude? Which VR traits and design features are salient to produce positive emotion and trigger prosocial point of view toward individual of stigmatized groups? Those are more about the art, but obviously involve psychology, is really a blend. And then given that cognitive and psychological exploration of social inequality and stigma have used photorealistic VR world, can art-based VR be used effectively to depict and impact social issues? Means if we use cartoon characters, is that going to be as good than photorealistic character? How can we maximize positive outcome in cognitive and affective learning related to prejudice mitigation? And then my hypothesis is that in VR for inclusion, art-based representation and narrative construction with positive affect may foster prosocial attitude more effectively than photorealistic representation and fear arousal scenario. And why I'm mentioning those two characteristics, the photorealistic and the fear, is because a lot of research in this field has presented actually those aspects. I also believe that just as in cinema, in which we identify with characters both through film and animation, going away from photorealism is a good thing because it does not carry any false assumptions, right? We're not assuming that, oh, if it's photorealistic, it's going to work. And also employs intergroup contact, that my research employs imagine intergroup contact. There's an established method to reduce prejudice and perspective taking inside immersive story worlds depicting the life of marginalized people. And it also employs storytelling that is one of the most ancient and established forms of social connection and sharing. The limitations are many, but just in a nutshell, we have very little examples of VR for inclusion. I'm going to call it VR for inclusion for brevity. That is a VR that wants to make people more inclined to accept the others, other groups. There's very little that is done that is not photorealistic. So that's a limitation. I did not have too much to grab on to test and experiment with. And then the play tester, I had a small group. I had only 15 people because I wanted them to go through a lot of VR experiences and compare. And now it's hard to find people willing to go through 6 VR experiences, fill questionnaires and everything else. And then obviously the big elephant in the room is that the perceptual, cognitive, and emotive component are explored only from the design perspective. And that's because I'm, limited on the psychology side that I already explained. I believe that a team of people should work on that. And I tried. I applied to several grants, but I didn't get them. And then in the last 2 decades, academic and private industry, and this is the significance, have worked hard to diversify. However, they still struggle to develop a culture of equality and respect, encompassing all races, gender, and socioeconomic statuses. Very little research exists on how to design VR for prejudice reduction, including the effectiveness of employing photorealistic technique. And though, despite all that, a lot of funds are devoted to creating VR experiences for bias training that do employ photorealism. So the next step is the delivery. So in my research, I deliver a comprehensive literature review of all these fields involved, all the fields involved with VR for prejudice reduction. I have 2 case studies or project I built that are really pushing different aspects of my research. I also did an action research in the classroom in which I had 15 students going through various state-of-the-art of VR and play tested and assessed. And then I built a taxonomy, an interface with all the results to guide future practitioners. And I created obviously data visualization of all the responses from the play testing. So these are the deliverable. This is my methods. I always start with a literature review. That means go and identify which VR aspect and categories are significant for the development of VR for inclusion. Identify obviously technological assets and constraints, identify desired perception and learning outcomes, and then identify the best practices potentially even through the literature review. Then I obviously go into the state of the art, go and look what has been done in this field and try to look at all the various experiences with an analytical and critical eye. I'm going to just kind of go a little bit faster, and then finally move into the evaluation. So once that I looked at the state of the art and selected a certain amount of experiences that were very diverse, and I'll explain later a little bit more. Then I went into the play testing, having students, experience all of these and measure their learning and their impact through the questionnaires, and obviously derive the best practices is the conclusion. Here, I'm actually going to be fairly brief on this because most people know what intergroup contact theory is, developed by Alport in 1979. We talk about defined groups and what groups are. I'm not going to go there and read it because, again, stop me if you don't know it, and I will read it. And then obviously intergroup contact. I think what is important to read, though, is under the right condition, contact between people of different group can lead to prejudice reduction and facilitate opportunities for intergroup friendship. That is really the core of the research, is trying to have inside VR world intergroup contact imagined in this case, right? Because we are in a technological manufacture world. So in a way, you're seeing the digital figure, but it's kind of like not real. But the idea of the research is to create stories inside VR worlds to reduce prejudice. It is possible to improve outgroup attitude and behavior, not only through direct contact, but also through imagined contact and the mental simulation of a positive social interaction with an outgroup member. Now, why positive? Some of the conditions for intergroup contact theory are highlighted right there and are to diminish negative affect. So not to have any anxiety and threat and fear or have limited of those, a limited amount of those. Include positive effects such as empathy, perspective taking, even goal sharing in which, people work together toward a common goal. And those really help to reduce prejudice. And then I talk obviously about virtual reality perspective taking and how you can be in VR and feel, embody a character and feel or look at things from the perspective of that particular person that you're embodying. And I write, if perspective taking exercises are moved into virtual reality, experiences can be induced, which would otherwise be prohibitively difficult or impossible, like having individual experience, having a different skin tone, age, gender, or inhabit a non-human body. And those experiences can be repeatable. And this matters because if you think about psychology, we talk about mental models and mental schema and how repetition shapes our behavior, our perceptions. And so having the ability through VR to repeat the experience is also an asset. Research suggested that the immersive environment, immersive virtual environment, can have a stronger impact on attitude of individual when compared to other forms of immersive media, while allowing researchers to have fine-grained control over the experience of the participants, and can render understanding of situation of the target less cognitively taxing. And this is huge for multimedia learning, thus increasing the average perspective taking, which may then lead to increased motivation for altruism and empathic concern. This is an overall schematic I created for the research in which I talk about the deliverable that I just mentioned, the issues that I just mentioned. One issue I did not mention is that there is quite a lack of undergraduate programs that teach VR in the art perspective. Means I am in an art department, and many art departments, just like mine, are still teaching beautiful fine art and photography and graphic design, but VR seems to be housed in computer science department. That is why I also teach in computer science, by the way. So that's one issue that I did not mention. And then another issue I did not mention more on the cognition and the psychology side is the idea that the ethics of VR. How is it right to force empathy? Some people are critical of using VR for these purposes. So all of the things I just mentioned are in this graph and trying to kind of make it concise in one place. These are the gurus. Now I'm talking a little bit quickly about the history. These are the guru of VR for inclusion. You can see a lot of, white male, I would say, kind of non-diverse. That is okay, but it's what it is. This side, there are the artists tend to use VR more on a not the VR that I'm researching, that is model-based VR. They're using more documentary and video-based VR. That is the difference between the two. The VR that is image-based, it means you have a camera that capture images 360 degrees, and then they get mapped with this rectangular images onto a cylinder or a sphere, and you have much less degree of motion, right? You can move your head and look around, versus in the model-based VR, you have degree of motion like in the real world, and I'm interested in that one. Here I talk about the idea of the mental schema and mental model that we could change with repetition. Again, is a graphic that I created in which you can see that we have external stimuli that we obviously interpret based on our cultural conditioning, and they enter our brain and through perceptions, predictions, judgment, behavior, create these mental models that basically become our decision and behaviors in the real world. Now, including VR narratives in there in which we can experience different scenarios could help with practice and repetition change these mental schemas. And again, there is evidence in my research and in the real text. I did my best, especially with Richard pointing me in the right direction, to justify every statement. The one I'm saying here, that there's always an author, a quote, or someone that is supporting that theory. It means I didn't make it up. Another important topic is the psychophysiological data detection. There are new technologies, not fully, yes.
You can always refer to the dissertation. If anybody wants any further information, it's all in my dissertation.
That's great. Thank you, Curtis. That's what I meant to say, that everything that I'm mentioning here is in the dissertation with all the supporting quotes and authors and papers. Thank you. In terms of the psychophysiological data detection, is a bit of a new science, but is promising. That is, we can at this point detect, fear, if you're feeling threatened, if we're feeling challenged, through just measuring brain waves, obviously sweat, your body temperature, heartbeat, and other things like that. And as you can see, there are papers that point exactly to racial stereotypes and biases and things like that. This is still at its infancy, but it's a really promising direction. And I have a case study in which I actually tinkered to use it, and it really did work. The uncanny valley is a really big topic in my research, right? Because we're talking about photorealistic representation. And if, I'm going to explain for whoever is not in the field, the uncanny valley is when you kind of feel like someone is so close to human, but not there yet. And so you have a sense of kind of, I don't want to say a repulsion, but almost like, eeriness, or like feeling strange of that presence, is something that is a problem in VR, not only in VR, but in VR is definitely present, especially when we have humans. It was identified by many people. Actually, there's even Freud that wrote a book called The Uncanny. And at that time, he was talking about wax sculptures. But the person that defined it in technology is this roboticist, Japanese roboticist called Masahiro Mori in 1970. And this graph that he did is extremely famous, even though I found out there's no real research, there isn't a lot of data that made those lines, those curves. Here I explained by my experience of tinkering with VR for 20 years, what to do to avoid the uncanny valley in humans, right? Especially. In order to avoid it, you have the level of the character realism must be matched by the way they move and behave. My point is, if the motion is very accurate, then you have to really be careful to be very accurate. For example, avoid the dead eyes, right? You don't want the eyes to be still, because if the person is moving and is constantly fixated in one spot, it's going to look dead. And that's one big problem. Also, stylize your character. A simplified representation can render the experience more natural and engaging. Or use the uncanny valley to your advantage. And that's the second case study that I'll talk about in a minute, does exactly that. And proximity is very important. When designing interaction with, for example, non-playable characters in VR, so not someone that you're embodying, but a character is next to you, the closest you get to that character, the more realistic that character needs to be in terms of believability. Now, it could be actually not photorealistic. I'm just saying it has to feel like is a real presence next to you. So a lot of experience is trying to keep the participant of the VR experience actually far away from the character, especially if those characters are video-based or photorealistic. This is the state of the art, and I think it might help because you can see in this figure, and actually this is one of the experiences that we play tested. It's called a 1,000-cut journey, done by some of the gurus of psychology, Jeremy Bailenson, Cogburn is the other collaborator. I don't remember Ogle as much, but these are the big players in the world of VR for inclusion. But you can see that this character has definitely a problem with the dead eyes, right? You can see that I'm embodying that character in that experience. I'm constantly staring in one direction. Some people go around it by only giving you hands instead of the full body, and that is a valid technique. These are more examples. These one also have dead eyes in that experience, and these are all research studies by psychology, so social psychologists especially. Another thing that is common is to put, big encounter, like an apex of the experience with cops screaming at you, pinning you down on the ground. Remember what we were talking about in intergroup contact and trying to avoid fear and anxiety. So I don't know why is there. So this is that experience that really pushes the uncanny valley and takes advantage of it in a way. And it was really an experiment with a group of students in a computer science faculty, Zoe Wood, it's called Dreamwalker, what it does is there's no humans in here, but it takes all these environments that are natural to us, like a forest, a city, and pushes the laws of physics to make them very different than the real world, even though they look so real. So if you're in a forest, you're going to start feeling the trees collapsing over you. If you're in a city, all of a sudden the building starts floating and turned upside down. So you're kind of, looking at the building as if they're the sky. And what we did at the time is we were just trying to figure out if all these experiences, because they were so uncanny, were going to generate disgust. Like the people would say, oh, this is horrible, or the opposite. And it ended up being the opposite. So that kind of proved the point. My students that play tested the experience in the that we are talking about in this project were asking me, can you use the uncanny valley for a positive outcome? And the dream walker is actually a great example of that. So I put it in the dissertation because, the uncanny valley is always seen as the negative things, but it's not always negative. And then another one that I played with is the angst dread. I wanted to test the detection of at least heartbeat or something to, test the new technologies in VR that allows you to measure emotions. And so I created this experience again with a group of student and a colleague in which you're in a completely surreal space and you have a lot of anxiety. You're putting through a lot of difficult tasks and you're told, calm down, otherwise you cannot progress, is obviously a parody on anxiety, because when you're anxious, to tell people calm down doesn't work. I did have a heart monitor that would allow you to progress through the experience if you indeed could lower your heart rate. So this was interesting just to show that these technologies are actually at reach. We just need to find out how to use them wisely. And finally, we go into the chapter 3, that is the creation of the taxonomy, that always starts with literature review and research on what already is out there, and then goes into the state of the art. So here I showed that, let me actually read really quick. Considering the fact that social psychologists, computer sciences have dominating VR research, and artists are invested in social issues, they are now more than ever, this research aimed to develop a taxonomy which shows a multidimensional and transdisciplinary framework. What I'm saying here is the outcome of all this literature review is eventually an interface that can guide both artists, psychologists, and whoever wants to do this type of work on what works and what doesn't. In terms of literature review, I did what everybody does, a lot of queries, a lot of searches, like VR plus, prejudice, VR plus, and I searched all the databases that I could find, and eventually got 816 hits, of which 212 made, sense for my research. And of those 212, I ended up actually reading in full 77. My point is, I read 212 abstract. Of those, 77 were so compelling and interesting. I read the whole paper and used it for, my own, knowledge of how to make the taxonomy. I'm going to try to be a little bit quick here because I don't know if it's that important, but here I explain the fields, art and design, social psychology, cognition, emotions, narrative. So all the searches that went into these fields are right here, the search strings, the hits, the selected article. Here, what I'm trying to show you is that I really did my best to be very rigorous, even though I'm not a psychologist. So I don't pretend to be even close to what Richard expects. And I'm grateful that he gives me, his time and guidance. Anyway, but beside that, this is actually a more fun part because it's the state of the art of VR. So in this case, I went all over the place trying to find experiences that used different strategies. So not just photorealistic, completely cartoony, some in between, some were made by psychologists, some by artists, some by computer scientists. And then once I got all these experiences, I started looking for the executable files, right? Because I wanted to do play testing. So I had to have something that I could pop into a computer and get the student to wear the HMD and play with it. And I eventually narrowed down to these 6 experiences. This is that 1,000-cut journey, very photorealistic, by Bailinson and team. Becoming Homeless, again, Bailinson and team, extremely photorealistic. This is a documentary. Is it actually Derek Ham did it? That is a graphic designer, but also aimed for photorealistic with a little bit of liberties, like highly saturated colors and no faces. Remember, to avoid the dead eyes, some of the artists came up with strategies to have no faces, or faces in which the eyes are not that visible, like in Re-Educated. Re-Educated is completely drawn, is done this time by a company, by the New Yorker hired these incredible animators to do it. It's about camps in China. Another Dream is very artistic as well. And The Book of Distance is very art-based as well. So these top three are more kind of in the world of photorealism. The other three are completely art-based. Here, I give you a little bit of a sense, right? You can see photorealistic art, photorealistic art, and art. And this here, I talk about the experiment, right? Bringing students to do this work. So I talk about the play tester. There are 15 students of 5 Caucasian, 8 Asian, 1 Latino Asian, et cetera, et cetera. Explain all the detail of the student, especially they all had done VR already. They were all interested in social justice. Now, these are students in that minor that I run. So they did it out of their own interest, that I was surprised. You know what I mean? They did all the play testing, all the questionnaire, because they truly cared. I mean, obviously explain my research like it was, you know, going to make a huge difference maybe in the world, but I mean, I was passionate, but they all did an incredible work. So what are the results at the end? Here, it talks about visual. Obviously, I went and looked into the visuals, you know, which experiences seem to sync, you know, to please the students more in terms of visuals. And you notice right here, the BOD stands for Book of Distance. I did not have enough room to put it all there. So the artistic experiences are The Book of Distance, Reeducated, and Another Dream. Those got the highest scores, right? So Book of Distance seems to everybody always scored it the highest. The Reeducated is really high as well. As you can see, Another Dream is fairly, you know, there, versus the other three much less. So photorealism didn't seem to please the student as much as artistic or art-based strategies. Here is about the humans and the experiences and which one were liked the most. Same, right? The Book of Distance, Reeducated, and Another Dream. Now, notice though, in I Am a Man, that is the one that is a bit hybrid between photoreal and artistic, that is done by the graphic designer, Derek Ham. He is actually an associate professor and chair of an art department, but his background is in graphic design, just giving you a little context of. So here I have a little bit more data in terms of emotions, which trigger the most emotion. What is interesting is Becoming Homeless has a scene in which you're in a bus and you're homeless and you have someone following you around, lots of anxiety. All of a sudden you turn and that person is right like on your face. In fact, some of my students screamed like and completely freaked out. So you can see Becoming Homeless has a high level of emotions. And the Book of Distance has no drama whatsoever. So it still has high emotion, but completely different kind of emotion. And here I tell you I'm limited because I wish I could have actually found a way to measure, you know, the quality, intensity in a much deeper way, but I couldn't. Means between my knowledge and the time constraints, it wasn't easy. And then there are interesting questions, like one of the question was, so I have some numerical questionnaire questions and some are more essay-based, and these are the essay-based. Overall, what kind of emotion did you feel throughout the experience? And what I was trying to find out is, was it negative, was it positive? Because of the story, the intergroup contact tells you that positive is definitely a better, you know, more likely to trigger the outcome of reduced prejudice. You can see Book of Distance, highly positive, Reeducated, fairly positive, and Another Dream, that are the one that are artistic, again, pretty good. Now, the one photorealistic, especially 1,000-Cut Journey and Becoming Becoming Homeless, were not that positive. So others, were there any character within the experience that were unsettling and uncanny? Again, the photorealistic one have more uncanniness. So here there is, I don't know if we want to stay for a long time in terms of cognition. What I love is that, again, I know how the question was, how much did you learn? And you can see down here, is there something you learned from this experience that you did not know before? You can see that the green and the blue means NA, means they didn't answer, wasn't that, you know, good, an answer that I could code as one or the other. But the rest, you can see that is highly positive for the artistic experiences. I should have put this one here, though. I just realized position-wise. But anyway, these are very positive. The art-based one, they didn't learn as much in the photorealistic one. Did it teach you only about one person's condition, like a mono level of knowledge, or about an entire culture? The reason why I did this question is because I interviewed a faculty in Parma, is a psychology faculty that specialized on prejudice reduction, social identity in VR. And she told me, if you're doing a VR experience in which you're talking about intergroup contact, you better have a group. You better have something that points to a group. It means people better feel like they have, there is a belonging to a certain social identity or cultural. And that's why I ask these questions. So when I was researching, whatever I managed to grasp from all different sources, including the interviews with people that know their field, I try to transfer it into this experience. Enjoyment. Richard taught me how important is enjoyment for learning, and I believe it is true. I know it by my own skin. I know that I learn a lot more when I love it. So you notice the Book of Distance has a, out of 10, we're almost a 9. It's pretty darn good. And Reeducated is quite high. Another Dream is quite high. The other one are a little bit lower with 1,000-cut journey. The one with the fixed eyes, very photorealistic at 6 or something. After finishing experience, please specify if you felt negative, like angry or sad, or positive feeling. It goes again and look at the emotions and enjoyment as well. And then given the option, would you repeat it? And then we talk about impact right here is the last of it. Again, very high impact for Reeducated. But you notice the impact is, and Becoming Homeless had a very high impact as well. That is actually photorealistic. By the end of the experience, did you feel like you wanted to do something, about the cause, right? Even just tell people about it. And the Book of Distance and Reeducated and Another Dream is pretty high. Do you think VR experience will stay with you longer than others? Again, you can see the green part. And then we have the taxonomy. So the taxonomy, I don't know if you're going to like it. For me, it was really fun to make. So in the taxonomy, I was trying to find out how can I pack all this information in one spot. So I came up with this idea of the wheel and the color coding. So each of the experience is color coded. And let's say I want to see all those data that I showed you a minute ago. I can simply click on the name of the experience and they show up. And there is a little bit of a Likert scale at the bottom. And it just, tells you, for example, that embodiment in Reeducated was very low. And Reeducated is the one is all drawn. You don't have a body to, embody, to wear. You don't have hands. And so I can see why is the case. There is no interactivity at all because you're a detainee in a prison. So it's purposely done that way. You have no power. But you can go in any of the experiences and see those numbers that I showed you a minute ago. Or you can get out and say, okay, I want to see how space is done in I Am a Man. Now, I Am a Man is the orange one. So I'm going to go in the orange one and click. And it shows you the sense, a few images to help you understand the sense of space. You can see these figures are without faces. I was mentioning it. It tells you a little bit about space in this experience. And you can kind of go and look at space in all the different experiences. This is the one that is completely drawn. This is the one that is the Book of Distance. Again, no faces in there, no eyes to avoid the dead eyes effect. And this is Another Dream. So every one of these categories, like enjoyment, I want to see how much did we enjoy the green experience that is Reeducated. And here I tell you a little bit about it. If you want to see the number, you obviously click on the experience itself. So I have basically all these categories, and for each of those categories, you can go and find out for that particular experience how that design element, that is the use of time, the use of space, the use of scale, or like the more psychological aspects like the enjoyment, the impact, the emotion. So you can go and find out for each experience and not only see the numerical score that the student gave, but read a little bit of what happens in the experience and see some of the images. So, and questions, if you have, I'll be happy to ask. And then the conclusion, the analysis data gathered from playtesting VR or the state of the art of VR to instill prosocial behavior suggests the artist and designer must join psychologist and engineer in developing virtual environment for behavioral health and cognitive training. In summary, based on everything that I have found out, it looks like there's a lot of potential for art-based VR, a representation that is art-based to reduce prejudice or instill prosocial social behavior. And these are the people that rocked my world in all these years. And they will continue, but these guys, hopefully I'll see them, soon, but not forever. This is my husband, my child that is 8, Galileo, and my parents that were always dreaming I would get a master in the United States. I made it. I did. Beyond the master. That's it. I hope I did not take too much time and I did not go too fast. Questions? Yes.
Hey,
It's about, you got a chat message.
Oh, let me try.
Enrico, please repeat the question if you get asked a question in person, just so
Yeah, repeat the question.
'cause I can't
Yeah,
hear.
I will. I'm trying
thank
to
you.
find the chat, but in the chat, I don't see anything. Oh, right here.
Our chat doesn't have any questions yet, at least from what I see.
Oh, you want to have the recording? Absolutely. I will definitely send the recording. Thank you. Yeah. So, question.
I'm
You.
kind of interested in the difference between, realistic as opposed to not realistic. Something designed by an artist as opposed to designed by a designer. Was there any way to get a feel for that?
Yeah, and I can go back in there and show you some images to that. So what it happened in the realistic, in fact, let me go, I think these are all active, maybe is in methods. There is an image with all the characters in there, and it shows you kind of the difference between, like here, or this. So in the people that have a foundation in psychology and computer science that create experiences tend to go photorealistic, simply because it's just that they have big scanners. There's a lot of research in University of Southern California with these giant scanners.
Enrica, I'm
oh.
sorry to interrupt. What is the question?
Oh, sorry, you're right. You're right. I apologize. So George asked, so whenever we're talking about art-based versus photorealistic, what is the boundary? When does photorealistic stops and art-based start? Is that kind of?
Well, let me ask it differently.
Yeah, sorry, different.
Yeah. Were you able to notice any differences of how people responded to projects produced by artists versus designers? And then the next question was, what about, photorealism versus more abstractive?
So was there a difference? How did people responded differently for experiences created by artists versus designers? And let me answer that one first, and then we go back to so yes, the one designed by that's why I kept saying Derek Ham is a graphic designer. He's really the only designer in the art-based experiences. The other two are made by artists. So the designer one, the I Am a Man, was not actually as successful. It means if you go and look at the data, that I can totally go in chapter 4, you'll see that when we talk about, for example, what happened here? When we talk about the data of the beginning, where it says the visual, how are the visual right here, visual and sound. So you see that I'm a Man in visual got 6.4, and this is done by a graphic designer or a designer, and it's fairly photorealistic, but with a lot of design in it, versus Reeducated and the Book of Distance is all done by artists, and those got like stellar scores, right? From 6 to 8 is quite a difference. So I noticed that the art actually definitely was above the design in this case.
The other question was, so you meant, you have examples from photorealist to abstract, I guess.
Yeah.
And can we see do you have any statistics on that?
Like this, you see this experience doesn't even have a face, right? And this one is all drawn versus these one are like pretty, So the statistic on, oh, sorry. Thanks for pointing that out. I thought I was sharing. Oops. Yes, thanks for pointing that out. I went back into my slides, but I did not screen share. So you want a statistic on the photorealistic for?
More abstracted.
For what? On the emotion side, cognition side, on which side?
Yeah, what I'm thinking about is to what degree can one communicate emotions through an abstracted representation as opposed to photorealistic. And like, in Paris, if you go to a bookshop, there's this whole section of comic books.
Yeah.
You see all these people just reading comic books.
Yeah.
And they are not photorealistic. They're,
Yeah, absolutely. So Georgia asks us, so to which degree a art-based experience triggers emotions compared to a photorealistic one? So I got to emotion right now, and the both Re-Educated, The Book of Distance, and Another Dream are completely like in the Georgia mentioned bookstores in Paris, or where the people read, graphic novels and kind of cartoon-based book. And that's what these are, actually. If you go and look at the visual of The Book of Distance, Re-Educated, or Another Dream, they look like what you would find in a graphic novel. And as you can see, in terms of emotion, they seem to do the job pretty well. Yeah, especially compared to, these are the photorealistic. There is 1,000 cut, 1,000 cut is photorealistic. Becoming All Homeless, I told you, has a high emotion, but why? Because there's that scene in which you get terrified by this person kind of basically hunting you down and being so close to you that you feel like you want to run. So also emotion is kind of a tricky one, because I would have to be a psychologist to really have a competent answer, because I should assess which kind of emotion, positive, negative, that I tried to do down here, right here. When I ask, what did you feel was positive or negative? Like, look at this is Becoming Homeless. This is all negative. That's the quality of the emotion in Becoming Homeless. This is the quality of emotion in The Book of Distance that is art-based. So the green one is art-based, ton of emotion, positive. The Becoming Homeless is photorealistic, ton of emotion, but negative emotions. And remember, the idea here is the foundation, the proven technique to reduce prejudice is intergroup contact, that explains very clearly through a ton of literature the fact that positive encounters are definitely going to succeed way more to reduce prejudice than the ones that have anxiety, fear, and everything else. And again, I'm not a psychologist, though. I feel like I would have more to say if I was. Any other questions? Yes, Richard.
So that very nice presentation with the dissertation.
Thank you.
I can see just a tremendous amount of work went into this, and I'm just so impressed with the breadth of your knowledge and your courage to go into all these different disciplines and make sense out of them and try and bring them together. I think that's very commendable.
Thank you.
And I love the visualizations. I mean, that's just sideline. I'm very interested in data visualizations and very creative when you do that. It's just kind of a sideline, I think. But I guess just a lot of questions, but I guess the top level question is, if you're trying to design a VR learning experience that's going to reduce prejudice or help people have more empathy, what would be like your top design principles? I think you've already talked about one of them, which is, drop the photorealism, use more schematic artistic representations. And I do think that's consistent with the psychology literature also. We get better learning when we have more schematic and pedagogical agents rather than extremely realistic ones. I think there's consistency there. But besides that,
so let me repeat the question. So Richard is asking me now, could I say Richard or Professor Meyer? I just realized, because you're an incredible stature. So anyway, but let me say Richard, because I like that. Richard is asking me, so if you were to design a VR experience in which you are trying to lessen prejudice, what would be the principles that you would employ? And we obviously talked about the photorealistic versus art plenty. There would be two more that I would think that are really crucial. One is what I learned from Tiziana Mancini, the interview that I did in Parma. That is, I noticed a lot of these experiences have very little people. Like there is one person that is victimized and one person that maybe is chasing you down, or two cops that are pinning you on the ground. But there is very little what you would call social identity. It means you cannot tell if there is a group of people in there that are all, of a certain, identity, maybe they're all of a certain race or a certain, sexual orientation. So what I think is missing often in these experiences that I explored is the sense of the group. And if we're thinking about intergroup content and wanting to, create that type of social identity, you would want the group. Now, not just a group of people, but even the culture. For example, the reason why I think that the Book of Distance is so successful because it depicts the Japanese culture. It means right away you feel in Japan, right? The whole you're in a. By the way, it also borrows from theater techniques that is fantastic. You're on a theater set and you are in this Japanese, home with the protagonist. So I think doing that group, it really helps. So that's another principle that matters. The third one is obviously trying to depict narratives that have positive message. Like the story of the Book of Distance is a beautiful story of this Japanese man going through a lot of troubles, but eventually has a beautiful ending. Also, it has some historical photos in there. So if you do have historical images, bring them into the experience because you're grounding that experience to the reality. And then one thing that I feel like the Book of Distance is above all the others for is something that, again, Richard taught me, and is the signaling principle. That is, a lot of the other experiences have no sign of what you can touch, right? So you're in an interactive, situation, but there are objects around you, but you have absolutely no idea which object you can, maybe sometimes they put an arrow eventually. But like, for example, I Am a Man was extremely frustrating. The opening scene is a truck coming back toward you, and there's a trash truck, and you're surrounded by trash can. And I stood there for a good minute thinking, okay, what is going to happen? Now, later I figured out I needed to take the trash can and pour them into the truck to start the experience. But everything got slowed down because a lot of time we had no clue what to do in these experiences. And the student felt the same way. In the Book of Distance, whoever designed it was so clever. They create these little fireflies around the objects that you need to interact with. So you're getting into a setup in which there's a sign that tells you, here I am. And they train you, right? The first fireflies, you don't really know, the little particles swarming around the object, but you gravitate toward it. And then obviously every time you see the fireflies, you know what's going to happen. So I would want to embed clues, and that the idea of embedding the signaling is it's kind of also in support of using art, right? Because it's a lot harder to put in signaling in a photorealistic experience, right? How can you put a little moving particle if you're trying to tell people we are in the real world? So I feel like the art in that regard has is an asset to do the artistic side, because you can embed signaling and other stuff. So in summary, you want to have potentially use art-based instead of photoreal. You want to create, obviously positive emotion. You want to tell a story that has a somehow positive side to it. You want to use signaling, and you want to use social identity, group or cultural component into the experience. Those 4 principles, I think, came across quite strongly in my research. And thanks for the question. Was great. I love it. I could summarize all my research in a nutshell.
So Misha has raised her hand.
Oh, okay. Misha, yes?
Quick question. When you talk about photorealism, are you focusing on how humans are represented? Or are you also considering the environment's realism?
In general, one goes with the other. It means if the humans are photorealistic, the environment are photorealistic as well. So I generally look at the overall. The experiences are art-based, the environments are art-based as well as the characters. So I generally look at the overall, but you point to something really clever, that is, can we mix the two? And so take the Dreamwalker that we did, in which the environment were realistic, and put in there some non-photorealistic characters. How would that work? That's future research would be fantastic. Yeah, good idea.
So I can imagine, 360 videos and other things, but your interactions and all the characters that you see in there are a certain art style. So while the world is realistic, maybe it actually helps improve the interaction or the believability of it versus detracting from it. But yeah, I mean, Uncanny Valley generally applies to faces. So that's a whole, I guess, 2 separate but related paths to what you're doing.
Yeah. I kind of liked the outcome of Dreamwalker, though, that the Uncanny Valley can on the environment at least can actually trigger some interesting effects, can be a positive thing. So I like that. I know that Misha has to leave soon. Any other questions? You look great in purple, by the way.
So maybe we should, the committee should confer.
Okay.
Everybody can leave.
Yeah. Should I close my computer? And let me tell. Oh, that's true. I forget that. So stop recording. You're right.
Don't-
Obviously. Yeah. Thank you for pause or